Good morning. Okay, this is take 3, seriously. You guys are gonna hear Nurse Kelli's kids slamming doors and walking in and out and can you call dad my PS4 blah 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 when they should be out here listening to story time. And I assure you they will be getting story time. So the book I'm reading right now is super fun. I think I might do a picture book, and then I have a couple books from when I was a kid, like literally. Can you see how old this baby is? This was my favorite book when I was a child. So at any rate, I think what I might do is like read a picture book, and then I'll read a couple chapters from a chapter book each day. But at any rate, real quick. So parents, children, talk to your children, because all this hoopla going on about the coronavirus, and our kids hear us talking about this. And if you think about the movies that are out in the video games, like my almost 8-year-old son, Kason's gonna be 8 tomorrow, was super upset because, he's thinking he hears virus and things are closing down. He heard us talking about our stocks. The stock market is crashing. And so he heard us talking about that. And in a 7-year-old brain, they don't know what we're talking about. So kiddos, this virus that's going around, just to put it in easier terms, it's a really bad cold that's really bad for old people and really little people, like baby people. It's not going to turn anybody into a zombie. There's not going to be a zombie apocalypse, okay? But in order for this virus to stop itself, and so we can control it a little bit better, we have to distance ourselves. We have to stay away from people because that's how it's spread. And, people are like, well, why are they taking kids out of school? It doesn't affect the kids. You're right, Karen, but the kids are the carriers, and they're giving this to, grandma that's in the nursing home and all the other grandmas and grandpas in the nursing home. So, it may seem that this is overkill, but it has to be done. But boys and girls, you don't have to, don't be scared, just be smart and wash your hands and stay home. Just because we aren't going to school, you cannot, this also means we're not going out to the movies. We're not going shopping. You have to have social distancing is what they're calling it. You have to stay home. I need you guys to work at doing some reading while you're on break. You need to get some exercise while you're on break. What does Mrs. Anderson say? No couch potatoes, okay? Get up, go outside, play. Pretend that this is, just a little bit of a summer break before the real summer break. I will do what I can from here. If you have any questions, reach out to me, shoot me an email. My work email is petersonk@meepoedu.org. I will do all that I can to help you, okay? But together we'll get through it. Just think of it as a little vacation, okay? So, moving on. This book is called Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. It is written by Ted Arnold. He must have illustrated too, because they have not listed an illustrator. Oh, there's Dad at the nursery, and there's little Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan. She had a funny name, but she wasn't much to blame. Her mother gave it to her just the same. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. Well, she had 2 peculiar hairs on her head. One was black and one was red. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. She had 2 eyes that were quite a sight. One looked left and the other looked right. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. She had 2 holes in the bottom of her nose, one for her fingers and one for her toes. Keep your fingers out of your nose, okay? If you do pick a boogie, wash your hands. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. Oh, and they are so proud of that baby girl, taking pictures. She had 2 teeth inside of her mouth. One went north and the other went south. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. She had 2 arms that flopped all around. When she walked, they would drag on the ground. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. She had 2 feet that were wide and flat, each one bigger than a bathroom mat. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. She had 1 brain inside of her head. What it thought is what she said. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. Some folks say her breath smells sweet, but me, I'd rather smell her feet. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan was her name. Those look like some stinky fees. If rain makes flowers sweet and clean, there ought to be a downpour on Magdalene. Woo! Oh, she got married. She got married. Catalina Magdalena Hoopensteiner Wallendiner Hogan Logan Bogan Smith. What's her name? I love it. Okay. So now this is called, if I can read it, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's Magic by Betty McDonald. Pictures by Hilary Knight. Now this isn't much of a picture book. And let's keep in mind this book is probably older than I am. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's Magic. Of course, the reason that all the children in our town like Mrs. Piggle Wiggle is because Mrs. Piggle Wiggle likes them. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle likes children. She enjoys talking to them, and best of all, they do not irritate her. When Molly O'Toole was looking at the colored pictures in Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's big dictionary and just happened to be eating a candy cane at the same time, and drooled candy cane juice on the colored pictures of gems and then forgot and shut the book so all the pages stuck together, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle didn't say, "Such a careless little girl can never look at colored pictures in my big dictionary again." Nor did she say, "You must never look at books when you're eating." She said, "Let's see, I think we can steam those pages apart and then we can wipe the stickiness off with a little soap and water. Like this. Now, see, just as good as new." There's nothing as cozy as a piece of candy in a book. Don't look so embarrassed, Molly. I almost drool every time I look at those gems. Which one is your favorite? I think mine is the lapis lazuli. When Dickie Williams, who was showing off for Patsy by riding in his wagon with his eyes shut, crashed through Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's basement window and landed in the coal bin, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle laughed so much she had to sit down on the front steps and wipe her eyes with her apron. Dickie was awfully scared and was going to sneak out the basement door and go home, but Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, still laughing, leaned through the broken window and said, "Hand me the putty knife and that can of putty off the shelf, and then go get me that pane of glass leaning against the wall over there by the furnace. Thank you very much. Now watch carefully, Dickie, because putting in window glass is something that every boy should know how to do, especially boys who ride wagons with their eyes closed." Look at her. She's cracking up. And my book is falling apart. Ah! I lost the page. This is old. When Marilyn Matson, who was helping Mrs. Piggle Wiggle serve tea, dropped and broke her brown teapot, she said, "Well, that's the luckiest thing I've ever known. You didn't get a drop of hot tea on you, and you broke that nasty teapot with the leaky spout that I've hated for 15 years. Tomorrow I'll go to town and buy a new one. I think I'll get pink, and I'm going to test the spout before I buy it." "But what about the tea?" said Marilyn, wiping tears off on her sleeve. "Make it in a coffee pot," said Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, "and we'll call it toffee." Another nice thing about Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, when a child makes her a present, no matter how splotchy or crooked it might be, she uses it and keeps it everywhere everyone can see it. Johnny Wilfred made her a vase out of a meat sauce bottle with such a little neck that only flowers with stems like hair would fit in it. Not only that, but he painted it a sort of green, and the paint was too thick and ran down the sides in warty lumps. But Mrs. Piggle Wiggle loves Johnny, and she loves the warty vase because Johnny made it for her. and she keeps it on the windowsill above the sink with at least one flower, gasping for breath, jammed through its little neck. Every time Johnny comes into her kitchen, he points proudly to the vase and says, "Do you see that pretty vase over there in the window? Well, I made it for Mrs. Pigglewiggle, didn't I, Mrs. Pigglewiggle?" When Susan Gray came staggering over with a plate of the first cookies she had ever made for Mrs. Pigglewiggle, Mrs. Pigglewiggle didn't take one look at the tannish gray lumps and say, "No, thank you." She said, "Why, Susan Gray, you smart girl, 8 years old and already making cookies. You're going to make somebody a very fine wife." "Yes, somebody with good teeth," said Hubert Prentice, who had taken one of the gray lumps and had found that trying to eat it was like biting on a stone. Mrs. Pigglewiggle took the cookie away from him and said, "Oh, Hubert, these are special cookies. You dip them in hot tea and take a bite." She hurried to the kitchen and made some tea, and then she and Molly and Hubert and Susan sat at the kitchen table and drank tea and gnawed at the stony cookies, which, in addition to being hard as rocks, tasted like glue because Susan had put gravy coloring instead of vanilla. When Molly and Hubert made gagging motions at each other, Mrs. Pigglewiggle slipped them some ginger cookies under the table, and Susan was so proud that she didn't even notice. Julie Ward knitted Mrs. Pigglewiggle a scarf that was about 10 yards long and 2 inches wide, and when Mrs. Pigglewiggle opened the box, she didn't say, "My, Julie, you must have had a giraffe in mind when you made the scarf." Instead, she said, "You know, Julie, this is much too pretty to wear as a scarf and keep tucked inside my coat. I'm going to wear it as a sash." She took the long, dirty blue, wormy-looking scarf and wrapped it around and around her waist and looped the ends over, and it did look nice from a distance. Julie was so proud. She said, "You know, Mrs. Pigglewiggle, when I was making that scarf, I just thought to myself, now I'll make this longer and then Mrs. Pigglewiggle can wear it as a belt too." Of course, she hadn't really. What actually happened was that she knitted on the scarf every afternoon when she was listening to the radio and just forgot to stop. Another wonderful trait of Mrs. Pigglewiggle's is the interested way she listens to dreams. Now, every child in the world loves to tell what he dreams, and if the dream doesn't seem to be quite long enough or interesting enough, sometimes some children work in old movies that they have seen or stories from their daddies have read to them. Stories their daddies have read to them the night before. Dream telling is an innocent pastime and very good for the imagination, but unfortunately, dream telling usually occurs at breakfast, a time when daddies and mommies are slightly irritable and always in a hurry, and in no mood for long, drawn-out stories of, "And then I was riding on this elephant and 2 Indians came up and tried to shoot me, but then I turned into a walnut and I dropped to the ground and About this time, the moms say, "Just let the dream go and finish your cereal." Or brother or sister will say, "Oh, you're just making that up. Anyway, it's my turn. Now I dreamed." Mrs. Pigglewiggle not only listens to dreams, she asks about them. Right after school, when the children come over to dig for treasure in her backyard. Mrs. Pigglewiggle was a pirate, and Mr. Pigglewiggle was a pirate, and when he died, he buried his treasures in her backyard. Or they'd have tea or play dolls, and she'd say, "Anybody have any good dreams last night?" And they'll be off. Once Molly O'Toole dreamed she was a raisin and was eaten by a rat. Johnny Green dreamed that he was a pirate and lived in a whale. Hubert Prentice dreamed that he was an icicle and could freeze anything he touched. Susan Gray dreamed that her dolls came alive. Larry Gray dreamed he was a cowboy and had a white horse. Mary Lou Robertson dreamed that her covers were frosting and woke up with her mouth full of blanket. Kitty Wheeling dreamed that she was a movie star and had a real fur coat. Patsy said that she dreamed she was an electric toaster and everybody said she was making it up and Patsy cried. And Mrs. Pigglewiggle said she would help Patsy with her dreams. Some of the children's dreams are so long and dull and full of rahs and uhs and ruhs that Mrs. Pigglewiggle finishes them off for them and says, "That was the way it was, wasn't it, Bobby?" Much to their evident relief. So you can see that loving children the way she does, Mrs. Pigglewiggle just naturally understands them even when they're being very difficult, which is of course why all mothers in our town call Mrs. Pigglewiggle whenever they're having trouble with their children. Mrs. Pigglewiggle always knows what to do, and then of course she has a big cupboard full of magic powders and pills and appliances to help cure children's bad habits. All right, tomorrow we will continue with the Thought You Setters cure.